Hello, everybody. I'm Shana Peshek, the Executive Director of the Machinists Institute. And when we were talking about topics that we thought would be interesting to people, negotiation skills came up as one of those that isn't necessarily something we're all, naturally great at. And I had the pleasure of being in a meeting where I witnessed Rebecca Johnson negotiate a contract. And I reached out to her after that and was like, oh my gosh, you have superhero powers. Like, that was amazing. And I wish I could do that. And how did you do that? It just seems so overwhelming for myself anytime I've had to go in and talk about a raise or changing some aspects of my job or anything around compensation. You get your heart rate just goes up and you're just, it's very nerve-wracking. And so that's why I was so blown away. And she said, it's not a superpower. It is a skill set that you learn and that you practice. And there are resources for that. And that she had all these resources and had a coach and everything. And I'm like, well, of course it is. That makes sense. It just hadn't occurred to me to particularly go after learning that skill set for myself. So this is a perfect opportunity to bring in Rebecca so that she can share all that she's learned and hopefully inspire people to kind of think about this skill set as ways it can really enhance your life and your career on multiple levels. So Rebecca, we're super happy to have you here today to share your expertise.
Amazing. Thank you. I so appreciate you having me here. I'm always excited to share information that I wish I had 20 years ago. So folks can take maybe a shortcut. Legislative and political strategy. I've got a really successful firm that works in Washington State. And that means I spend a lot of time with legislators, like elected officials across the political spectrum and organizations across the political spectrum, trying to navigate to create policies that help different communities. And you're like, okay, like, what does that have to do with negotiation? Like, stuff that you want to do, it's actually the same skills. I was telling folks before everyone hopped on, it's the same strategies that work for helping legislators and organizations navigate tricky situations are the same skills I use when I was negotiating the contract that Shana watched me negotiate. Or even like in my own household, like who's picking up the dog poop in the backyard this week. It's the same skills. So we've got an hour. If you've got questions while I'm speaking, just unmute yourself and hop in, or you can type it in the chat. And then I'll make sure we have time for questions at the end. So what I'm hoping to share with you today is like what the preparation process looks like. And my experience is that if you do just a little bit of preparation, it can totally change the tone of a conversation or a negotiation and make it more successful. And I spent a little time talking about how you structure a conversation or a negotiation, some just tips and tricks like strategies for success, do Q&A, and then I'll share with you, if we've got time at the end, the best professional advice I've ever gotten. And then I've got some resources if you want to do a deeper dive into this. There are a ton of resources. Okay, so I first started my formal negotiation career. I think I was 22. I was working for a labor union. They were like, you're going to go negotiate a contract. And I was like Stacy, I am a little bit of an introvert, and I pictured like men in suits pounding on tables, like who can yell the loudest to get what you want, and people being mad. And not only does that not really like work with my personality, like it looks ridiculous if I try to do it. And fortunately, what I discovered then, and have for the last 20 years, is that you don't have to do it that way. In fact, would recommend not doing it that way, because when you're in an interaction and one person feels like they got run over, or they got bullied, or they said yes to something they didn't really want to say yes to, that is a bad way to start a relationship. And even if you got the yes from yelling and screaming, like the other party is probably not going to follow through like with enthusiasm or positive feelings. And it's just better to try to get what you want out of a conversation, and ideally everyone walks out feeling good with their needs met. Okay, so my number one goal that I always have when I'm walking into a conversation is to create a relationship and a connection with the people that you're talking with. And a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is ways to create that connection, create those relationships. I think it's probably oversaid, but it's totally true that relationships and connections really are power within your company, within your industry, personally. Like having the right relationships and having the right connections gives you power. And in an individual conversation, if you can make that connection, you're much more likely to kind of get what you want out of the conversation. So we're going to talk about stuff that you can do before you're in a conversation or before you're in a negotiation. I'm going to use conversation and negotiation kind of interchangeably. Getting clear on what you want. So if you sit down and do a little exercise where you're thinking, what do you want? And then I would encourage you to go one step deeper. Like, what do you really want? Are you trying to stop something from happening? Are you trying to change something? Are you trying to create something new? Taking time to get clarity on that is really important. Shana and I, last year, we were working on an apprenticeship bill, and we spent a significant amount of time in the summer getting clear on what we wanted in that policy. And we ended up getting actually everything on our list. But when we started talking, we kind of had ideas that were floating out everywhere. Getting that clarity helps you make a clear ask. And here's a couple of other questions you can ask yourself. There were no consequences. If cost wasn't a factor, if no one would be mad or hurt, what would you want? And then why do you want that? How it will make your life or job better, how it will make you feel, how it will make it easier for you to do your job. The why is really important because it helps you actually get down to like underneath what you think you want. I do this, like, I think everybody does this. Like sometimes we get stuck on the how. I'm trying to think of a simple example. Like I had an here who was like, you have to have I was on salary, but we had to fill out timesheets and they were due at like 5 o'clock on Friday. And I was like, the worst time. And I was like, please don't make me fill out these timesheets. But what I really wanted was to not have something that was like happening at 4:30 on Friday, which was in my control. But also like, didn't want to be doing it at 5:30 on Friday. I didn't really see why I needed to be doing it. Since I was on salary, and just like thought through, like, thinking through like how will it make it easier for me to do my job, how will it make me feel. We ended up working out like I got a timesheet that was already filled out, and I just like hit the click submit button every week. So it was like this relatively small example, but thinking if it was just like, I don't want to do this timesheet, that probably would have been a non-starter in that conversation. If it was like, what I really don't want to be doing is like having to fill this out manually at 4:30 on Friday. So we found a different solution. And then thinking through, I guess, kind of what I was talking about, are there other ways to get to your whys, and what are they? Going through these why questions can help you clarify your ask. It will also help you, if you've thought about this before you're in a conversation, it'll help you be open to alternate possibilities. So if you're really clear on like, actually, what is it that you're trying to get out of this? The other person or may have ideas, or in the process of the conversation, you may together come up with ideas. Going through kind of the why exercise is helpful. And then you're going to kind of flip it. So a good way to make a connection is to try to see things from the other person's perspective. So how does what you want help the other person or people you're talking with? How would it make their life or job easier? How could it help the company? What would it give them to say yes? So like for Rowan, when you're doing buying, I think you're probably interacting with folks who are selling to you, like negotiating a price or talking through a price, talking through how things are going to be delivered. You also want to think through like, what's it going to do for the other person that you're talking to. Clearing judgment and planning for objections. So when you walk into a conversation, it's really helpful. Like judgment gets in the way of influence. Judgment gets in the way of people being able to hear you. And then kind of fear does the same thing. There's a bunch of science behind this that I won't go into, but is in some of the resources. that I linked at the end, but like if you're uncomfortable or you have fear or you think the other person is kind of a jerk, that comes through in nonverbal language. You might be perfectly polite and lovely, but like our faces and our bodies, we'll say our faces now that we're in kind of the virtual world, like communicate what we're really feeling and thinking. So spend some time before you get into that conversation, like thinking, do I have beliefs that might get in the way of making a connection? Beliefs about the likely outcome of the conversation, like I'm asking for too much money for this product. I'm not sure they're going to be able to afford it. I'm really intimidated because this person has been in the industry for 20 years and I just started. I think they might be mean. Like anything like that, just listing it out. Sometimes we'll just clear it. Here's something like they'll never say yes. I feel intimidated. Like I definitely still feel intimidated occasionally. And if I can write it out, sometimes that's enough to clear it and have that, like that energy or those thoughts like not come through in the negotiation. But if that's not enough, you can ask questions like, is it like kind of challenge your own beliefs? Is it true? Is it really true? So you're going to be like, is it true? Like, yeah, that person really is a jerk. And I wish I didn't even have to have this conversation. But then if you're like, is it really true? Like, could there be any other way to look at this? Do I really have all the evidence to make that judgment? How does it feel when I believe this? What would it be like if I never had this belief? And then what's the opposite? Going through this process really on any belief can like kind of help loosen the hold on it. So like, I think Mary's really a jerk. Why? Like, you know, because she like always has this like super angry look on her face. And then is it really true? Well, not sure. Like she could have other stuff going on in her life. Maybe it has nothing to do with me. I once thought one of my colleagues was mad at me for like 6 months. I was like, why is Nancy so mad at me? Did I do something? Have I offended her? And then this is like so ridiculous, but it turned out she'd like had really aggressive Botox and it like kind of froze her face. And so like I wasn't like what I was picking up on was what I wasn't seeing was like facial movements or like smiles, and I wouldn't even be able to tell you like what it is that your forehead does or your eyes do like when you're happy and listening, but I wasn't seeing that. So I thought she was mad at me. She was not mad at me. She just anyway, just a little bit of that. So there's always like there can be like hilarious explanations like that or different explanations. It is easier to connect with someone if you don't have judgment about them. I'm telling you that story. Thank you. I feel silly sharing it, but I really did for many months wonder why my colleague was so pissed at me. Okay. And then you're going to think through objections they might raise and write a quick response. So Rowan is buying a product. You need them to give it to you 30 days faster than they say that they're going to. Like, what objections might they raise? They might be like, it's totally impossible, supply chain. This is what we agreed to when we started this contract 6 months ago. Like, you're going to write down each of those, and then you can write a quick response. You can either use the is it true process or kind of go back to what does this do for them. And this is helpful. So this and kind of like what does it do for them process are really helpful for prepping yourself for what perspective the other person or people might have. But we're not going to have to memorize all of this stuff. Like this really is just kind of like a process to go through before you get into the actual conversation, because in the actual conversation, you're going to do a lot of questions and listening for answers to tell actually what their actual perspective is. So how to do the pre-conversation brainstorm with yourself. It sounds like a lot, what I just described. There's a number of steps. It does not have to take a long time. There is a whole time management theory, I think it's called Pomodoro, that has to do like you set a timer for 20 minutes and you do a task for 20 minutes. I feel that 20 minutes sometimes is too long, especially if it's something I'm kind of dreading to do. I can do anything for 7 minutes, it turns out. So I have run through kind of this pre-conversation brainstorm in 2 to 7 minute chunks. I could probably get it into 1 7-minute chunk. Just spending, I just set a timer on my phone. I like turn off Facebook and all my alerts, and I just like write it out for 7 minutes. I do a lot of stuff. Right now I'm really into writing by hand, but I've also used the notes function in my phone or on my computer. I've got these guys, which have now gone up to 75 cents. They used to be 33 cents. But just like my like composition book, these are all over my house. So sitting down, doing the brainstorm with yourself, I would recommend writing it out. Some people can do it just like thinking, writing it out or doing like a voice memo, I find helps it sink into your mind. And again, like the goal is not to memorize all this. The goal really is just to go through this process so you're clear and you can be more present when you're actually in the conversation. Okay, I'll pause there. Are there questions about that process before we move into actually like you're in a conversation, what do you want to do? Okay, I don't see questions.
Rebecca, I just wanted to say how great your structured format and sequences for preparing for a successful conversation. I think this is brilliant. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Okay, awesome. I'm glad this is helpful. It's time for the negotiation, and we're going to talk about how to make the most powerful connection. So the mindset that I like to walk into a conversation on that I like to walk into a conversation with is that I'm on the same team. We are on team figure it out. The other person is like, we're going to work together to figure out a solution to the problem or figure out an answer to my ask. And that means staying curious. So some of the work around kind of clearing the judgment and clearing the thoughts you might have about outcomes helps you stay curious and approaching it from the other person's perspective. And my goal is to listen 80 to 90% of the time and talk 10 to 20%, because you're trying to connect to the other person. You're trying to understand their perspective. You did an exercise about what their perspective might be. We're also wrong a lot. So figuring out, like there's a famous negotiation exercise with an orange where two people are like negotiating over the orange. Have folks seen this? I can only see Stacy's face, but there's an orange. I'm negotiating with Stacy about the orange. Kind of super traditional, old school men in suits strategy is like split the difference. You're going to cut the orange in half. I get half the orange. Stacy gets half the orange. But if you get into the conversation, as the exercise goes, and this holds for real life, it turns out Stacy wants the peel for a recipe that she's using, and I want the flesh of the orange to make orange juice. We can both get what we want. But we actually have to be in conversation about what is it that we want? Like what are we trying to get in order to actually get to that outcome where everybody's happy? So for me, that means listening. Like I'm asking a question and I'm listening. Let's just say, and before I jump into this, let's just say like you didn't do any of the pre-conversation work. It's totally okay. You do just want to, like, your goal still is to stay present in that negotiation. And I'll do that. I mean, I'll do that whether or not I've done whether or not I've done the pre-work, but like breathing, feeling myself in the chair, knowing that I'm just here to be like a curious listener and learn about the other person. So you can be completely successful in a conversation if you haven't done the pre-work. I find it makes it easier to get to that space of just presence, but it's not fatal if you don't do it. Okay. Structuring a conversation. And I was writing this got a little bit complicated because it really is, you get into like an actual conversation, which is hard to figure out how to like describe how it works, but I think we all know because we do conversations every day. But here's how I would structure it kind of on a macro level. One, like start with a thank you for literally anything. Thank you for the time today. Thank you for this thing that you did 3 weeks ago. Thank you, anything. Gratitude and recognition are like a super fast way to make a connection, makes the other person feel good and makes them feel seen. And then I'll talk about like, what are we talking about today? And I try to frame it as like, we're having the beginning of a conversation, or I'll say, hey, like I want to ask you like your thoughts on a couple things. this is what I have. Like, do you have anything else you want to talk about today? And then you're, finding out how they want or how they see this. The goal there, so actually I'll talk through this and then I'll go back up to the goals. And then we're going to talk about maybe some solutions and do some next steps, and then add a thank you at the end, and then I'll talk about the follow-up. But on the goals and how you're framing the conversation, I like to take the pressure off. Like the worst thing is if someone feels like you're going to try to make them say yes to something maybe they don't want to say yes to. And the examples I think of are like going to buy a car, which at least when you're walking into a car dealership, like you are actually wanting to buy a car. But I feel super intimidated when I walk in, like they're going to be throwing stuff at me that I'm not a car expert. I'm not sure if I'm going to need. And I feel like someone's going to try to make me say yes to something maybe I don't want or need. So that at least is a scenario where like I'm going in and I want something. I was at Lowe's this weekend, and the guys who sell solar panels, like I saw them from like a few miles away. I knew they were going to like try to talk to me about buying solar panels. I probably would love to have solar panels and would love to have more information, but I was like, that's a conversation I don't want to be in. Like, I don't want to do it. So, I try to not make eye contact and walk as fast as I can. That is not the vibe that you want in a negotiation. So if you can take pressure off, like this is the beginning of a conversation, I'm just curious about your thoughts. It helps the other person feel like we're in a scenario where we're in a conversation, not a pressure. Oh, we have a situation this week that this is so helpful for. Jody, do you want to share it with us? Okay.
Whoops, sorry. I couldn't unmute myself. It's like clicking on my name. That didn't work. Yes, so this is going to be very helpful. I've been dreading it and I've been putting it off. And like I'm a little bit of an introvert. And so the 80-20 or the 80% listening will be helpful because I get nervous and just start talking. And then it doesn't go well. So this will be great. It's with a family member. I'm trying to sell a piece of my property. So it just is uncomfortable to begin with, negotiating terms on that. And we've been going back and forth for almost a year now. So these are great things to have in my toolbox to, start that conversation again and look for a win-win situation, like Kirk always says. So this couldn't have been more perfect timing. So thank you.
That is awesome. Thank you. And these work for family situations really well, which sometimes can be the hardest conversations of all. That's great. Before I skip off this page, I'm going to say follow up with an email that says thank you, summarizing top points, and then any agreements or next steps. The follow-up email is really important. One, like saying thank you, another opportunity to say thank you, another opportunity to have a connection. The second is the summarizing top points and like next steps. Like that way you're sure that you have a plan and that the other person, like you talked about it. Doing a follow-up email helps make sure it actually happens. And then any agreements and next steps. So I once upon a time, I interviewed for a job. I accepted it. Part of our agreement that we made while I was in the interview was that there would be, after 6 months, a pay increase. And I had sent my thank you email because I was like, I was just out of law school, like where like all the training was like, you send a thank you email after you do a conversation. And I did that, and I had summarized like, so excited, really excited. I'm so glad we agreed on, it sounds like we've come to agreement on this raise at 6 months. Well, 6 months came and went, and my paycheck was the same. And I was like, oh man. And I was like, oh no, I sent an email. So I had just forwarded the email and said, hey, like, does this still work? What do you need from me? And it was very smooth because I wasn't asking my boss to remember a conversation that he had 6 months before. Like, I can barely remember what day it is sometimes, could not tell you what I had for dinner last Wednesday, not going to remember necessarily a conversation that was 6 months ago that like that pay raise was super important for me, but for him, like it wasn't critical. So it wasn't in his memory. So the follow-up email, especially summarizing anything that you came to agreement on, can be really helpful both in the short term and in the long term. Okay. This 80% listening, sometimes you can just like start out the conversation and say, what are your thoughts? Other times it's helpful to ask questions. And I gave some examples here, like what are some of the biggest challenges you've seen? Rowan, I keep coming back to your like buying situation, like what's happening in the market right now? How are things going? How could this work? Sometimes, you know, I'll come up with an idea and it has been talked to death and like people have already tried it in the past and it didn't work. So you can do this in your pre-planning too, is just kind of like prep yourself with some questions that you might want to ask. I find that once you're in a conversation, people will usually just talk and you can like just give them encouragement and they'll keep talking. One thing you'll notice on this list is that there is not a question that starts with why. And the reason for that is that when you ask somebody why, it seems like that just like puts people on the defensive. Like asking them to justify something. The good news, so I would recommend steering yourself away from why questions. Good news is you can translate almost any why question into a what or a how question. So if I'm like, I think we should paint the room, or Stacey says to me, we should paint the room blue. I'm like, why blue? God, like, so I could either say why blue or like, hey, like, okay, like, how would that work? Like, what would that do for this room for it to be blue? So you just want to, if you have a why question in your head, think about how you might translate it to a what or a how. The other reason for the questions and kind of the 80-20 or 90-10 listening, talking is our brains are passive. And unfortunately, right now, I feel like I'm doing a presentation, but our brains go passive when it's a presentation, but active when you're actually engaging in a conversation or your brain is like asked a question. So people are going to engage more meaningfully if there are questions and they're answering and they're like doing a thought process to think about how would this work, or what solutions might we come up with. Okay, so we've done like, we've done kind of the framing. We've spent a significant percentage of the time of this conversation listening, and then at the end or throughout, you're gonna like reframe what you're hearing from them and do kind of the ask like through their perspective. So like super secret, I think it's on a future slide too, but this, it seems like, is that right? Like sentence structure works really well because it helps the other person be seen. So like Stacey's like, I want the room to be blue. I'm like, oh, seems like you really see merit in this room being blue because it could, you know, give us all a sense of calm and peace. But you're not sure if we should expand this room. Is that right? And if you're able to reframe, like restate somebody's idea back to them, they'll either say, yes, that's right, you really heard me. Or if you happen to be wrong, they'll be like, no, that's not what I meant. And then you'll have more clarity on what their perspective is. And then if you're getting objections or if you're feeling like they're like not yet ready to say yes, finding out like what information do they need? Like what other things should we be thinking about? Do we need to talk to other people? Like just identifying where there are next steps to be taken. Okay, so these are some specific strategies to help make a connection. So physiology before the meeting, power posing. Does anybody remember, like, do you remember power posing? There was like a TED Talk, it's probably 10 years ago, Harvard study that showed if you stand in like the Wonder Woman or the Superman pose with your hands on your hips and your feet wide, like a study showed that like graduates who were going in for job interviews were way more successful. When I Googled this to find an image, there was a bunch of articles that said this is very controversial. So I guess I would say, like, not sure if the study results were valid. What I would say about this is try it. And if it doesn't work, like everything in this presentation, actually try it. If it works for you, awesome. If it doesn't, that's totally fine too. I do find that getting your body moving can really help influence your mindset. So if you're feeling kind of low energy, let's see if I can, I'm gonna have to take on my screen. If you're feeling low energy, then like get yourself moving. I'm not going to be able to figure out how to do this. I've got a small trampoline behind me, like one of those silly little, like from the 80s trampolines, and I will bounce on it before I have a meeting. Or if I'm mad, I definitely still have frustrating interactions with sometimes with clients, with legislators. It is like impossible to maintain a bad mood if I'm bouncing. So stuff like getting up and just like, you can put on music and dance, or I'll bounce or get on the elliptical, or just like do something to get your blood flowing and blood flowing to your brain helps as you're getting into a conversation. Then there's something I've heard called mind reading, which is you bring up possible objections before the other person does. And way back in the pre-planning, like we talked about, like what might be some possible objections that they'll bring it out. They might bring up, it's too expensive, I don't have time. Jody, for your example, like it's hard to negotiate, especially with money, with family, I find. So like, how are you asking me, your family member, to like pay this much? If you've thought through those and you bring it up, it actually takes the power away. When it's like I feel like we have a tendency or a thought that like avoiding it will make it not real. But actually, if you call it out and say, hey, like you might be thinking that this is going to be too expensive, or you might be thinking that this will take too much time, or you might be thinking that this isn't worth it. Whether or not the person agrees with you, like verbally saying that, like gives them kind of permission to say other objections, which you want to hear. And it also potentially takes the power out of that objection that they might be having in that moment. Okay, this is like for my introverts, for Stacy and Jody, and anyone else who might identify as an introvert. I'm an introvert. Mirroring. So people like people who they identify with in some way. People like people who are like them. And that could be like, we both wear glasses, or you like blue, I like blue. The other way is this thing that's called mirroring, which when I first learned about it, I was like, there's no way that's going to work and people are going to know that I'm doing it. No one's ever called me out on, no one's ever been like, are you doing this? And it's a really easy way to have a conversation. So there's two ways. One is when you're in a conversation, you just repeat the last 3 words, or like the most important 3 words of the person's like last sentence. So I'm still doing this painting the room blue thing with Stacy. So like Stacy says, I really think that we should paint the room blue because it's going to be really calming. And then I would say, it's going to be really calming. And Stacey's going to say, yes, it's going to be really calming because da, 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 da. And like, it is a way to like stretch out a conversation. It makes the other person feel like you are really listening. You do have to be listening to catch those last 3 words. And it's a way to make a fast connection and help the other person feel seen and heard. So mirroring with the last 3 words. I have one of my friends and I, who one of the negotiation books that's at the end, like we both read it about the same time, and we were like, okay, this weekend we're going to do mirroring all weekend. And it's great, and it doesn't take a lot of brain power to be in the conversation. You're just listening for the last 3 words. And as kind of an introvert, I super appreciate that, because I'm like, I feel like I can like put this conversation on cruise control. The other way is mirroring body language. This works both in person and virtually. You're seeing less of a person virtually, but crossing, someone crosses their arms and you cross your arms. They are sitting forward and you lean forward. And after you do this for a few minutes, like you'll find that the other person's leaned forward and you lean forward, and then you lean back and then they'll lean back. So people will unconsciously start mirroring you back. It's a great way to build rapport. It's a great way to build connection. It does take some thought when you're first beginning to do it. Like it takes some concentration to remember that you're doing it, but it's a really effective to make that connection. And then the thing I mentioned earlier that it seems like is that right sentence construction, to mirror back, to reframe back somebody, what somebody else just said. Getting someone to say that's right is like magical. They, my experience is that people like feel like you're really understanding them, you're really on the same page, you're really following along and in the same conversation. So that sentence, I really like. I have substituted, I used to say stuff like, what I hear you saying is blah, blah, blah. I find this works better because it's like acknowledging kind of the truth of their statement or the truth to them of their statement. You're not necessarily agreeing that the sky is red. You're just saying like, it seems like you like see the sky as being red. Is that right? And then we're like, yes, and here's why. So those are two tricks or two strategies you can use in almost any situation. And it does feel weird. The mirroring especially, I'll just say does feel weird, but it's worth doing it. Is that right? Yeah. Dylan says, it feels like, is that right? I also prioritize their viewpoint over yours. Yes. Okay, calibrated no questions. This is one Shana and I talked about. I can't remember if I used it in that meeting that the negotiation that she's talking about, but you don't have to be afraid of the word no. In fact, there's freedom on the other side of no. So like if the solar panel guy had caught up to me and I'd been able to say no, like, are you interested in buying solar panels today? No. Then I feel like I would have actually probably been more receptive to getting more information about solar panels. So if you, there's a whole school of thought that's like starting with no instead of getting to yes. Starting out a conversation with a no. When you're calling someone on the phone, a lot of us will be like, hey, is this a good time to talk? Which sort of pressures the other person into saying yes. But if you guys say, is this a bad time? Then they get to say no, or they could say, yes, it actually is. Can you call back later? If you are like stuck, like you've done a negotiation and the other person has gone silent, send me an email that's like, hey, have you given up on this project we were working on? Which is like asking for a no. Almost always gets a response. I'm not sure why that is, but that does seem to be how it works. And then we talked a little bit about this of taking pressure off with hypothetical questions. So you're not actually asking somebody to come up with the steps. You're like, hey, like, if we were going to do this, what would be your first steps that you'd want to do? Or I know Shane and Dylan have both heard me say this, like, we don't have to answer this today, but like, could we do like a thinking time project? Could you give some thought to XYZ? Almost always when I've done that, we've actually ended up having the conversation right there. But you're taking pressure off and you're taking off that like, oh my God, someone's going to try to make me say yes to something I'm not ready for, by putting it in the hypothetical. And then the final thing I'll say is leveraging mistakes. Mistakes happen. I used to be super nervous. I was going to like say a contract clause wrong or misstate a position or say like a lot of times legislators will be like, what happens if XYZ, like what happens if someone sues somebody for this? I was really afraid I was going to make a mistake. The reality is mistakes do happen. And I have found that going back and cleaning them up is like the best way to build trust. Because then people are like, oh yeah, like Rebecca, thought each piece was going to cost $25, but I've gone back and been like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Like it was actually $27.50. And that builds trust. Let's see, how am I doing on time? Oh, still 15 minutes, great. Okay, so I'll tell a story about the trust thing. We were negotiating the paid family leave insurance policy a few years ago, and it was working families, so like kind of a labor coalition and then a business coalition, and it was such a hard negotiation. I think we spent the first 6 or 7 weeks in a room kind of hating each other. We eventually did get to yes and built a family leave insurance program that worked both for workers and businesses. But at the beginning, we had made an agreement that what happened in the room was going to be confidential because we wanted everybody to be able to speak freely. And we were each gonna, like both of our groups were gonna go back and report to the folks we were representing, but like we were not gonna like yell at each other on social media. We weren't gonna send out emails saying like, the unions are terrible or the business groups are terrible and they're trying to screw you. Like it was like me, kind of like communications blackout. We're just having this conversation together in this room. And we made that agreement. It was like maybe 10 days later, it was a Saturday morning. I'd had only have a cup of coffee. And someone sent me a link to a tweet that had like a link to a document that was basically all of the notes from our last negotiation meeting. I was like, this is this huge violation of trust. Like, how the hell did this happen? We agreed on this. I'm so mad. I would not, I was not in a great state when I like texted the senator who was in charge of negotiations on the other side and the head of the Association of Washington Business and was like, what the fuck just happened? And I got calls back from both of them. Within 20 minutes, they were like, we're so sorry, we're taking care of it. We'll get it taken down. It was down within 90 minutes. And I felt really good about like, I raised an issue. It was a mistake. They took care of it. And that made it easier when like a couple weeks later, my side, like one of our organizations sent out a super hateful email about like, don't let, I was on the labor side, like, don't let business like take this away from you. And I like, it clicked into my email probably also on a Saturday morning. I was like, oh my God, this is really bad. And I called them. I was like, I just saw this. I'm taking care of it. I'm really sorry. And I would say that that interaction of each of us making a mistake and then going and fixing it was probably the biggest trust builder that happened in those first few weeks of negotiation. So all of this is to say, like, do not be afraid of mistakes. I'd almost tell you to intentionally make one, but like I don't have to because they happen. And it's okay. It will actually help you build that trust and rapport. Okay. Before we go to my number one best professional advice I've ever gotten, are there questions or thoughts?
I just want to say this is really, really great. And so many of these concepts they have the gears in my head turning in terms of how to like make them normative behaviors rather than something I have to use brain power to remember to do, right? And I think especially this last piece on leveraging mistakes to build trust is one of those things that I think probably takes folks the most training to learn how to do, because I think a lot of folks, when they make a mistake, either become defensive or they sort of like overreact and over apologize and things like that. Do you have any guidance on, when a mistake is made, like clearly what to do is leverage it to build trust, but are there reactive behaviors that you would say, don't do this, don't apologize 50 times, anything like that?
That's a really good question. So well, I guess I have a couple thoughts. One, and kind of, I guess, speaking to some of the women on the call, as a professional woman, I trained myself never to say I'm sorry. Like there was like a whole, it's probably still out there, like you should never apologize because that shows weakness. And I would say the last couple of years, I've been like, actually, I feel like apologizing. I'm going to apologize. I would apologize. Probably not 50 times, Dylan, but I think saying like, I'm so sorry, like this happened, even if it wasn't a mistake that you personally made, like just being like, oh my gosh, like this happened and I am really sorry that this happened, it's powerful to be able to say that. I would say not to do them with a mistake, like try to cover it up. Like it just, it always seems like the act of like covering up or trying to hide something just creates so many more problems than that whatever the initial mistake was. So I would say as fast as you can, go tell the person, like, I said this, I'm so sorry. Like I went back and checked with my folks, owning the mistake. Yeah, owning the mistake is trust. So sorry, this happened. Here's what I'm doing to fix it, or here's the actual right information, or I have so many examples of like, I had a client or the organization I was working for, like posted something mean about somebody else. Like just going back and being like, I'm so sorry. And like, we're going to work to make sure this doesn't happen again. And if it's a mistake like that, where it's like something that was aimed at somebody or could have harmed somebody, it's like, and here's what I'm doing, here's what I'm doing to help make sure this doesn't happen again. Like on the family leave negotiations, I reviewed every email that went out after that. to make sure that we were being true to what our agreements had been. So owning the mistake as fast as you can with the right people. You can also ask the other person, like, hey, like, what would it take to make this right? What do you need from me now? Does that answer the question, Dylan?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. And then you also said, like, how do we like systematize this and make this not use brain power? It won't use brain power as you do it more. Like the first few times, or you got to like be like, okay, I'm doing this pre-conversation like work. Now I can just sit down and grab one of my like composition books, and I'll just like jot down my notes really fast. It gets easier as you practice. It's a muscle. Any other questions or thoughts?
Well, I just want to say thank you, because I've spent my career learning good and great communication skills, and you just put them like you just put them out there so easily. This is like a master's course. So this is not easy information to find, and I love how you put so many great ideas together in such a short format. So I think everybody here is benefiting from this information. I just wanted to say how great it was.
I am so glad. Here are some resources if you want to go deeper. Never Split the Difference. If you're going to only read one of these, Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss is my favorite negotiation book. And it really focuses on a lot of the tactics. You'll see some of the things I brought up today, tactics while you're in a conversation. The book is great. The audiobook is good. There's also a ton of free content. Chris Voss does a lot of stuff on YouTube. Like, he's got a lot of videos that I love listening to. His voice is great. You can kind of hear how he was like an FBI hostage negotiator that did it differently. So Chris Voss book is great. These two Cialdini books, Persuasion and Influence, they are huge. They are like super thick books, really dense. They might feel a little bit dated because at least the Influence book, I think, was written in the 80s, kind of for salespeople. But I really, it's good information. And then he doesn't work for everybody, but Tony Robbins of infomercial fame. I like Tony. So he's got this course called Mastering Influence. You can buy it, or I'm pretty sure it's also available free on YouTube. But those are some good resources if you want to go deeper. I'll share the number one, thank you, Dylan. The number one piece of professional advice I ever got was from my contracts professor, my first year of law school, Kate O'Neill. I think she said this probably on our second day of class. I could not tell you a single other thing I learned in that class, but this one has stuck with me. And it was, don't be an asshole. Because you will be seeing these people that are in this class with you for the rest of your life. And what you do here in this room, law students are kind of jerks. They can be competitive, stressed out jerks. She's like, whatever you do in this room, whatever you do with your classmates, like, they will remember it and you will be encountering them in the future. So just don't be an asshole. And I will say that has definitely held true with my law school colleagues, and it's held true in like every professional arena in my life. If I were going to add one, I would say tell the truth, like, don't lie. But that is also kind of like included in the don't be a jerk advice. It's really important. You can have bad days, you can have bad weeks, you can have bad interactions. Go clean them up if you do. And I would say the opposite is also true. So Shayna and I started working a year ago. I never met Shayna before. I never worked with her before. Shayna works really closely with one of my best friends, Carrie Pierce. So I've been hearing cool Shayna stories for at least 10 years, maybe 15. So when I was like, oh my gosh, I got to work with Shayna, I was like, yes, like, I know she's really cool. I don't remember specifically what Carrie said, but like, pretty sure she likes sparkly things and I like sparkly things. And she seems like she's like really like awesome. So I was telling Shayna before you got on, I was telling Stacey and Kurt and Jody, like, I'll do anything Shayna asks me. And as part that I've loved to work with you this last year, but like, I already knew you were awesome before we came into this, like before we got to work together, because I'd heard about it. So the moral of the story is like, be as good as you can, just try not to be a jerk. And that will help you forever.